The first is to live in the greatest degree of love. Second is to always choose kindness. And lastly, to practice nonviolence in speech and action. The greatest degree of love is one of only two requirements of a minister of the Alliance of Divine Love, the other being a belief in the power of divine love. We're charged to always act in the greatest degree of love for all concerned in all things. The greatest degree of love sometimes only results from introspection and deep concern. What may initially look like the greatest degree of love may not be for everyone involved once we view a situation from every angle. When we look from the point of view of everyone involved and affected by a situation, then the actual greatest degree of love will become clearer, and it may be surprising. Acting in the greatest degree of love can be challenging at the best of times. In 2020, it can be daunting. It's now more important than ever before because our extended community seems to be stretched beyond the ordinary by the pandemic, by racial injustice, by politics and pseudo-politics, by the perception of old hatreds and new fears, and by the perception of old fears and new hatreds. To survive as a community and as individuals, we must first realize that there is no such thing as hatred. There's only fear manifesting as hatred. The world is moved by only two forces, love and fear. Love is manifested as kindness. Fear is manifested as hatred. The Dalai Lama has famously said, "Kindness is my religion." Your initial reaction may be that this is a phrase best suited to be embroidered on a pillow, but that it falls short as a mandate for living. But not so. Kindness is everything. In fact, I submit that kindness and nonviolence are partners. Nonviolence is based on kindness, and kindness works through nonviolence. Living with kindness and nonviolence is living in the greatest degree of love. A Native American elder I know says that I'm going to go back to my friend, the Native American elder, who says that his aim is to live every day as a prayer. It's such a beautiful practice. And I think that these practices are very similar. When we try to make a difference, that's what makes the difference. When we attempt, that's what makes the difference, even if we are not successful all the time. I mean, we may vote, we may work to get out the vote, we may be politically active or at least help fund political action. But in the end, who is elected to either DC or a state capital isn't controlled only by our desires. I wish, but they're not. The occupants of the White House and the State House are also not who control the details of how our daily lives are lived. Yes, those occupants make a big difference in our lives. And I urge you to exercise your First Amendment rights as much as possible in whatever way you choose. But I don't think that's the end of your part in forming a peaceful society. There are social obligations that run across political systems and nations. Whether you're in the US or Russia or Costa Rica, one basis of a peaceful society is peace among individuals. If every national and state office were occupied by our choices, but we're at odds with the next door neighbor and fly into road rage with every commute, our lives are going to be unsettled and unpeaceful and miserable. If our choices lost every political race, but we're at peace with our neighbors and those we meet in the grocery store and on the road, we make our lives and theirs more peaceful and secure. And as a corollary, that peace can translate along society, when people stop reacting and voting based on fear. Just think back through this crazy year of 2020. Pick any situation as an example and view it as if the parties involved had acted only through kindness and not fear, and through the greatest degree of love. Think, in Florida, if the police at the Wendy's had acted through kindness and the greatest degree of love, they would have just called a friend to come pick up Rayshard Brooks to get him off the street and from behind the wheel. That was the real point. If our government had acted through kindness and love and not paranoia, which is a form of fear, with respect to the pandemic, there would have been immediate evaluation and action, and many people who've been lost would still be alive. If the lady in the park in New York who called police on the bird watcher had acted through kindness and not fear, she would have leashed her dog in the first place. Now, interestingly, in an act of kindness, the bird watcher has said he will not cooperate with the prosecutor in her case because he feels she's already suffered enough from her actions. Think of the Berlin Wall. If the protesters had come to the wall with guns and grenades to attack the guards, instead of with hammers and pickaxes to attack the wall, The wall would still be standing, many protesters would have been killed, and history would have taken a different path. We already know that while we cannot control what happens to us, we can always control our reaction to what happens. Just as our lives are what we believe to be true, so will our future be what we jointly envision. If we look at the world with awe and to the future with hope, we can help make that future come true. If we look at the world as a place of violence and speak in terms of violence, it's likely that the future will be violent. We can choose either fear or the future. If we choose fear, then there is no future. Your actions, and especially your energy, help create that future. I do ask so that you work for peace, not fight for peace. Not only is fighting for peace a logically fallacious argument, it also subtly promotes the very idea of violence, which in turn makes the idea of violence more commonplace and acceptable.
Mm-hmm. It's about...
Think of the many commonplace instances. Neal, you want... Yeah, thank you. Think of the many commonplace instances where we use the language of gun violence in our culture. Armed with the facts, bite the bullet, half-cocked, rapid fire, locked and loaded, under the gun, numerous others. When you stop to think about it, it's incredible how much of our daily language has become permeated with these and similar terms. It's created a situation that is actually the opposite of the newspeak of Orwell's 1984, where the book's totalitarian government erased certainly words to discourage free thinking. Words rooted in violence have become added to today's common language to such an extent that we become unknowingly complacent with the idea of violence and living in a violent environment. Now, I don't know if those additions were deliberate or simply the result of a too competitive environment, but we can deliberately choose to not use the terms of violence in our daily speech. When we become inured to the language of violence and the pervasiveness of violence, we permit our society to become more violent. Fear can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. If everyone in the country carried a gun for fear of encountering a gunman, then the streets would be filled with people carrying guns, a scene which is sadly becoming more commonplace every day. If every motorist acted as if they were encountering road rage from every other driver, then the streets would be filled with angry motorists. Fear can cause an otherwise peaceful person to lash out in what is perceived as a preemptive, self-protective action. How much of the violence we see now is a result of that fear? Now, please understand, I'm not saying that shootings and incidents of road rage don't occur. They occur all too often. I do submit, however, that expecting a threat at every juncture of life can create an aura of fear that can spawn violence because everyone is on edge all the time. A recent example of that has occurred in neighboring St. Louis, if you remember the people out in front of their house with the guns. A study released by the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety revealed the amazing statistics. It says 8 million U.S. drivers have engaged in extreme examples of road rage, including ramming another vehicle or getting out of the car to confront another driver. That 104 million drivers have purposefully tailgated, and that 12 to 24% of drivers in the survey have physically tried to block another car or have purposely cut off another car in traffic. We were all probably taught to drive defensively, but it appears that too many people are now driving offensively. That increases the level of violence in the entire society. Years ago, I was trying to get into a parking garage downtown and I saw this happen. It was terrifying. Two people tried to enter the garage at the same time and one of them rammed the other one. They both backed up. They rammed again. They backed up. They rammed again. They were still doing it when I left. They might still be there doing it. Our perception as individuals and as a collection of individuals can create a violent world or create a peaceful world. We've all heard that axiom that if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. That saying implies that cognitive function is the primary, perhaps even the only filter through which we experience the world. There's a deeper level, though, through which we both experience the world and manifest to the world. Depending upon your particular religion, or as I prefer to term it, life philosophy, you may call that inner level of knowing the core of being, or the soul, or the ground of being, or the spark of God. However you think of that deeper level, I urge you to go there when you're seeking direction or the proper response to a situation. It is on that deeper level that you will find the truth. There's a place also where the work of the individual and the work of community come together, and that's by reviving and caring for our neighbors. There's a strength in community which is psychological as well as physical. As individuals, we can become paranoid because we feel all alone in the world. As a member of a community, we are more connected and hence feel safer and feel better about life in general. In these days of social distancing, we may feel disconnected and unsure, but there's always a way to reach out. Call an older relative, join an online discussion, contribute to a good cause, maybe even, here's the thought, write a letter. There are many ways to act, even during a pandemic. It's true that one feels more connected to others if one cares about others. The old saying is true. It is far better to love than to be loved. It seems harder to work on an individual level because we all want to make sweeping changes in society that will last for generations. We want to change whole societies in the course of history. That doesn't mean, however, that we shouldn't do what we can and affect those we can and make the changes we can. We all know that this idea has been espoused even by those giants of history who have touched the world. Gandhi famously said, "Be the change that you wish to see in the world." Mother Teresa said, "I alone cannot change the world, but I can cast a stone across the waters to create many ripples." I think we sometimes forget how far those ripples can spread. In today's world of vitriolic rhetoric, short tempers, and open carry laws, it takes courage to be different, to be calm, to refrain from the language of hate, to stand for the light, and frankly, to hold help for the future. Gandhi also declared that nonviolence is the weapon of the brave. Every time you refrain from answering violence with violence, you act as a witness for others of the ability to create a peaceful world. If someone cuts you off in traffic, the initial desire is to accelerate and cut them off in turn. If someone cuts ahead of you in line at the grocery store, the initial desire is to loudly proclaim that heinous act to everyone else in the store. And if someone posts a hateful message on Facebook, the immediate desire is to respond in time and let them know in no uncertain terms exactly how wrong they are. As we all know, this is the most trying circumstance of all. On an individual level, we can, for example, choose to be generous in traffic. Realize you have control of the situation when someone tries to cut into your lane. You can use that control to either fight back and refuse to give up your place on the road, or you can choose to graciously allow them into the lane. The effect of this simple act is to immediately reduce both your stress level and the stress level of the other driver. You're no longer fighting, and you have taken control of the situation, which always feels good. Admittedly, the other driver will probably think he's won a point in some unknown game. Regardless, the chances are much less that the other driver will continue to drive so aggressively that he will cause an accident somewhere down the road, or arrive at work in such a state of anger that he picks a fight with the first person he meets. So with one simple act, you've elevated your day and his day, and the experiences of the people you will both encounter throughout the day. Thinking of the other driver can also give you possible insights into the life of another. Is that person's life really so depressed that the only achievement he can imagine is to get in front of you on the freeway? If so, give gratitude for the blessings in your life and say a little prayer for that driver. He probably needs it. Violence takes many forms: the person-to-person violence of bullying, the social violence of discrimination and hatred, the economic violence of poverty, even the ecological violence of pollution and destruction of habitat. Can we change them all by our individual acts of kindness? Well, no, not all at once, possibly not even in our lifetime, but we can act in love to bring kindness and nonviolence to the world, starting with our own lives, our family, our friends, our acquaintances. Then it spreads to their friends and acquaintances, and then to their friends and acquaintances. That ripple effect. We've all heard that Margaret Mead said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world." However, according to the website of the Institute for Intercultural Studies, established by Mead herself, there's no written work providing any context for that quote, and it's actually thought to have just been maybe a response during an interview. But that's the power of idea, that an offhand remark lives on through the years and provides hope for today's people. So I urge you, as thoughtful, committed citizens of the world, to make these practices a part of your daily life. View every situation through the lens of the greatest degree of love. Always choose violence, and always follow a path of nonviolence in your daily lives and in your speech, and working together we will change the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary, for sharing that wisdom with all of us. I guess now I'm just gonna open it up if anybody has any questions or comments that they would like to direct to Reverend McCoy. You can go ahead and unmute yourself. Jen?
Hi, Vern.
I see it.
Is that Vern Barnet hiding behind that beard?
It is. It is. Mary, so much of what you said, you distilled so much wisdom. I just want to particularly applaud your focus on the language that we use. After 9/11, there were three possible metaphors. There was the metaphor which had been used up until that point for terrorist attacks, which was namely crime. The metaphor that we ultimately used was war, which is even more violent. Instead, we should have used the metaphor of disease and sought to understand why this horror occurred and find ways to heal conditions out of which this terrible thing happens. But you know, even when we talk about disease, we are using violent metaphors. We talk about fighting a disease. So I want to applaud your focus on the power of the metaphors of the language that we use, and ask you if you want to say any more about that.
Well, it's just that, like I say, I don't know if that's an accident, if it's just coincidence that we have all these violent words in our daily speech at the same time that we see the NRA so powerful. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But living in the greatest degree of love also means that, as Vern says, you look for the purposes behind an action. What caused it? Look at something from every standpoint, from the standpoint of every actor in a situation, and you're going to find it might be a little different than what you think immediately. Thank you, Vern, for that observation.
I wonder if you could repeat the terms that you associated with gun violence. My church is trying to counteract gun violence.
Okay, I would tell you, here's a good resource. I don't know the exact citation of the URL, but if you will Google Grandparents Against Gun Violence, then you'll find their website. They have an entire glossary of terms, much more than what just the few instances that I had, like lock and loaded and bite the bullet and stuff. And you can actually even order copies of those glossary for people at your church. Okay. And it's amazing when you think about it. It is incredibly amazing how much we don't even think about these terms that we use, and yet they make a big difference in our lives.
Yes, they do. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
It's like Debbie and Alan. Is that Alan Edelman? I see a hand raised. Yeah?
It is, but ladies first, if somebody else. Did you say someone?
No, I just saw that you had your hand raised on Zoom. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on something that Vern said. Also, Mary, thank you very much for that presentation. Really great.
Thank you, Ellen.
And on the point of language, I think people are aware that the Hebrew word peace is shalom. It comes from the root of shlemut, which means wholeness. And I think so much of what you said relates to the fact that people are not whole. And those people who are whole in their thinking, in their feeling, in their view of the world, find themselves approaching the kinds of things that you pointed out that lead to violence and lead to confrontation, can really lead to peace and a different approach if you yourself feel this level of wholesomeness and completeness, and you don't to do those kinds of things.
I think that's very true. It's just the same way that we think that disease is really dis-ease. So violence and upset is an indication of a broken life. It is not together. It is not whole. It's not balanced. It's broken. I think our charge is to try to heal and try to make every aspect of life and every person we encounter whole.
Looks like Amber has her hand raised. Did you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Reverend McCoy. I really enjoyed your talk. I was thinking about your, when you said, if you change the things we look at, if we would change the way we look at things, the things we look at change. And it reminds me of the scripture that says that, you know, by beholding, we become changed. And I've been trying to think a lot about that in terms of how much news I consume, or, you know, what kinds of things I focus on. And I can tell that my energy and anger shifts depending on how much negative news I consume, yet it's still happening, right?
Yeah.
Not looking at it doesn't make it go away. And sometimes I struggle with, am I just ignoring it and thereby being part of the problem because I'm not engaging with it, or am I engaging in self-care around that? So I had that thought, and I wondered if you had some input on that. But the other thing I was thinking about in relation to that same quote is that sometimes I've heard that quote used as a way to minimize the reality of racism, where people might say, well, if you look for it, you're going to find it. But if you just sort of stop looking for racism, then, you know, you won't feel
It's still
I
there.
think it's all going to magically go away.
exactly. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that as well.
Well, okay, as far as the idea of the news is concerned, I think it is necessary to have a little bit of self-help, because I know that I'm a news junkie. I've always been a news junkie, but there are times in the last several years that I can't handle it anymore. I feel like my head is going to explode. My heart's going to explode. I'm going to be able to operate. And so obviously you have to, when it comes down to it, you have to make sure that you can be whole also. You can't help others be whole if you're not whole. And if that means you need to take a break and do some self-help, then that's what you should do. As far as, well, okay. On the other thing, people can always use quotations the same way they use statistics. They can always twist it around to make it fit what they think the world is like. Whatever they do, we know that racism exists. We know that it's systemic. I was just looking on, the Kansas City Star, looking online, and they have an article about how a small town in our general area is having a debate. If you can imagine, they're having a debate over the fact that their school mascot is the Savage, and the Savage is pictured as a Native American man. I mean, my God, how can this be a debate? So, I mean, you can't. Yeah, it's possible to twist things around, but we know what the world is, and we have to counteract that. We have to bring it up. I know I have friends that say, why do you keep bringing up this appeal to intellect? It's appeal to telling people that if you think about something, you'll understand it's different. I think it's because we have to try. If we keep pounding away at it, well, maybe pounding is not the greatest word, but if we keep stressing that it is important to understand the basis of things, eventually it's going to get through somebody's head. That's, at least that's what I hope.
I'd like to say something. As far as an example goes, some of the things that the examples you were giving, it's not as violent probably as war, but I feel like it's negative. I heard, I don't know, last week or a couple weeks ago in a Zoom or something I had, one of the presenters used physical distance instead of social distance, because we're trying really hard to be social through safe means. So I'm trying to use the term physical distance because
I think that's very wise.
Is not really what we're about. We're social creatures. And that comment about the language and so many debates. I was doing a lot of reading yesterday afternoon about misinformation and disinformation. Okay, there's a difference. Misinformation is a mistake, but when it's taken as truth and used in evil ways or ways to persuade others, that then it's disinformation.
Mhm.
It's untruth. And
Words are very important.
Yeah, and used more in propaganda and things like that. So, you know, because I'm sure I'm not the only one that just shakes her head and said, did he really say that? You know.
Well, and that's the whole point with code words. That's why, as I know Amber is familiar, code words are so important because they mean something different to this inside group than they do to regular English, and that they're triggers. So,
Right.
yeah.
Could you give an
Barb,
example of those?
Oh, pardon?
Can you give me an example of a code word? Just one.
Well, okay, one that's being used a lot right now by a certain individual in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
is having to do with, I can't think what he said now because I don't really listen to him. But he's making this plea towards what he calls suburban housewives, which you may be the only suburban housewife left, that if they don't watch it, people will move into their neighborhoods who are who have rental income, you know, who rent instead of owning. That's a code word. That means we don't want people of color moving into our neighborhood because they're always rent. They don't have as much money. You know, that's a code word. It's not true, like most code words aren't.
What was the code word? They rent, they don't buy?
Renters. Renters.
Oh, renters.
Yeah.
Oh, just the word renter.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's insidious.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And thank you so much for taking your time to speak to us. I'll let someone else speak. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm.
Barb, did you have some?
Yes, I would suggest that, well, that justice is a manifestation of love. And our social institutions especially must administer justice. And that is, on an individual level, we manifest love. But our social institutions must manifest justice.
Right. I mean, justice is a societal form of love. Exactly. And again, I think we need to, if we focus on love and kindness and not fear and hatred, the whole society changes. Our whole outlook changes. Our lives change. The world changes. In a nutshell.
I think that Neal had his hand raised before. Did you still have a question?
Well, yes, sort of, except that.
Hi, Lynn.
Hi, hey, Mary, Reverend McCoy. Yeah, this is Neal's phone, and I am so glad.
Sorry about that. I couldn't see you.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm so glad that he caught you. And this is just beautiful. I missed maybe the beginning of it, but I'll catch up with that later. And I loved what you were saying about even just like traffic and, you know, the way that, you know, that we can change things and change other people into a happier state of mind by, you know, just letting them in, you know, if that's, it's such a huge thing. And I think what happens in a car, for example, is that people have, they have some sort of protective vehicle.
Mhm.
And I don't think they would ever knock anybody off the sidewalk. Well, they might, but I feel like they probably wouldn't like push somebody off of the sidewalk. But, you know, they feel like a certain sense of anonymity, and I didn't say that right. Just like maybe in online, I
Mhm.
don't know much about the Facebooky bullying thing, but I guess people, they may not say something like that to someone's face, but they feel okay saying that. And I just like, one thing that I grew up with, my mother said lots of stuff to me, and this is from Proverbs, where a soft answer turneth away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. And that's like,
Look
you
at
know,
Portland.
yeah, exactly. That's it. I mean, you know, look at Portland. I mean, these people that are, even people that are peaceful protesters, I mean, if you poke at some animal long enough, you know, they're going to fight back. Like, you know, my dog Pearl is a lab, and labs are known to be extraordinarily gentle. And she treats everybody as a friend and a loved one. However, you get some little snippy dog that comes up and barks and snarls, and, you know, and I remember the first time that happened, and I heard her, she didn't bite him or anything, but she gave back a little bit of what she gave him. I was just so surprised. And I think this is what's happening to people in Portland, and also probably what happened to me. If you got me into that situation where I'm going to, you know, react that way, it's really, really tricky. And
It is, and I think we could learn a lot from our animal friends, because I remember we used to have this monster, his huge dog, Donamore, who was a collie mix, and he was like 96 pounds, and nothing bothered him except this one little Chihuahua that just had an attitude, and he just lunged at him and he roared and he snarled, and on Donamore went, "Arr!" and he backed off. I think we need to learn from that. We need to back off from that.
exactly. And what it's telling us is when we do react, we are, and nothing against animals, but we are reacting from our amygdala, our lower instinctual part of our brain, rather than our, well, you probably know more about this, our frontal lobe, the one that gives us our consciousness. The reason that we think we're so much better than the other animals is because we choose love and we choose justice. And we fail when we allow those survival instincts to kick in above what we know to be our better judgment.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Very true, Lynn. Jenny.
Yeah, I was thinking while you were speaking that for me, the person who embodies what you spoke of was, I wish I could say is, John Lewis to such a large degree.
Love.
And also piggybacking on what, and I forgot your name, who said this about racism, but to me, a lot of what undergirds the violence is racism.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been taking a Zoom thing called Empathy is Your Superpower, taught by David Camp. Does anybody know him? Or he's a Black man, and it's been hard for me because it's building rapport with someone who has different views than you. I think he calls them the skeptic, but building rapport, you know, and it can be something simple as, you know, well, I hear you say blah, blah, blah. Did something happen to you to make you say that? And making a connection, which, because I immediately just, it's like I could just feel my, you know, my body reacting, where that's the last thing I want to do. But I think that there's validity, and he's not at all saying agree with the person, but an attempt to join with them and then maybe change some thinking. So
on a personal basis.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Very important.
Did anyone else have any questions?
I had a couple more thoughts. One was I was thinking about what Lynn said about sometimes, I think Lynn, you mentioned this, being in a car and somehow that changes your orientation. And I serve on the Police Community Relations and Review Commission here in Oxford. And, you know, we're always having sometimes challenging conversations around policing and the community. And so I read a lot of different research papers related to policing. And I just wanted to kind of briefly touch on a couple that I think relate to what we're talking about today. One, Reverend, you were talking about the words that we use, the violent words that we use. And there's this interesting study out of Oakland, California, where they analyzed police body cam footage around routine traffic stops. And they analyzed the language used by police officers according to the race of the motorist. And one of the things they look at are the different language units, and they code different language units, and they look at what kinds of language units are used more with Black motorists than with white motorists. So one example is hands-on wheel is a language unit, and that's much more often used with Black motorists. Keep your hand on the wheel. Formal terms of address like sir or ma'am, more likely to be used with white motorists. With Black motorists, it's informal like dude, bro, man. But the one thing that really stuck out to me was there's a language unit called be safe. And it's what an officer says to the motorist when they're ending the engagement. And that is much more likely to be used with white motorists than with Black motorists. So it's often not just what we say, but what we don't say that gives a message about how we feel about the people we're engaging with. And so their officers were more likely to say be safe at the end when they're letting the person go with white people than with Black people.
That is so sad.
It's a really well done study, and it's very interesting. And I had this conversation with our police chief telling him about it. And what was interesting is he listened and he said, you know, I need to think about that. He said, I know I say be safe when I end, but I haven't thought of who I say it to and how often I say it to one group of people versus another. The other concept that's come out to, that I've learned about is called enclothed cognition. And it's about the fact that the way we dress changes the way we act and behave. And so, you know, I think about that when I think about the riot gear that police wear. And this was a study where they had undergraduates, half of the undergrads wearing a police uniform, the other half not wearing a police uniform. And then they were playing this shooting game where they had to figure out who to shoot and who not to shoot, depending on whether or not they had a weapon in their hands. And those in police uniforms were more likely to shoot unarmed people, especially unarmed Black people in the video game, because related to their sense of power and impunity simply in putting on a police uniform. So I just think about all of that in terms of language and in terms of whether we're in a car or in some kind of body armor. It changes the way we interact with our fellow human being. Just
if we feel isolated.
Yeah.
It turns the whole world into a blue eye, brown eye situation. Exactly. We have a lot of work cut out for us, folks.
Other questions or comments for the Reverend McCoy?
Oh, Jen?
Okay, do you hear me?
Yes.
You hear me now, eh? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I just thought I'd give a word of encouragement to all of you. I'm joining you from Canada, and it's true that the words are so powerful. Where I live and in other cities of Canada, there were marches for the Black Lives Matter in response to the marches that were being held in the States. So I think it's an expression of kindness to for us in Canada to recognize that we're dealing with our own racism too. And aside from marches, there's a lot of different ways to communicate understanding, and I'd like to put this on the screen if I can. I think it's big enough to see.
Toni Morrison.
Yeah. So it's a Canadian calendar, but in the middle of the calendar, it honors an American writer. So again, as you can see from the video, I'm not a Black person, but each month there's a local Black person is honored for his or her achievement. And so it's a simple way to educate, because when you think of it, a lot of white people don't bother putting a black calendar on the wall. But I thought it was interesting. I got it early in the year, and it's a simple way to educate myself, because most of the people in the calendar are people that I had not been familiar with until I read a little bio that's attached to the photo. So that's all I have to say.
Well, it's very important to do what we can, and it's good to know that you're joining us from Canada, where you don't have the guns.
We still have some guns.
Do you? Well, yeah.
Yeah, we did have guns, yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your talk.
Thank you.
Were there other questions or comments? No.
Okay, I'll disappoint myself if I don't say to all the Kansas City people, go Astros, and that's all I'll say.
Go who?
Houston Astros.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I'm not a sports fan. Don't get it.
That's okay, sweetie, don't worry. When I saw Kansas City, I thought, oh, yeah.
Oh, we must be playing Houston. Okay.
I don't know. I don't know when y'all are playing us. I don't even know how long the season's going to last with COVID, but anyway.
It might be over by the end of the week. Who knows?
You know what? You might be right.
Any other questions or comments?
I'll make one comment.
Sure.
Reverend Mary, I thought by just reading this that this talk was going to be about different like meditation kinds of practices, contemplative, practices. So this was this was very different, but not that much. Really, it wasn't that specific, but this was very needed and very helpful. And so I really appreciate this. Is a wonderful job, because every time I listen to these, and I do a lot of classes on Zoom are free, some I have to pay for, but the topic may be the same, even with the same words, but the perspective when people such as yourself come on and do it are so enlightening because of the language that's used. So I really think it behooves us to do as many of these as we can and listen and take heart. I personally take notes, because eventually with so many perspectives, it's going to fall on some open ears, I'm sure. I mean, a lot of our ears are open, but some people's aren't. So eventually maybe we'll get to the words that open their ears.
Right.
Right.
Thank you for that. And I would also say that meditation can take a lot of different forms.
Oh, absolutely.
Meditation can also be contemplating the greatest degree of love. It can also be watching your language and watching your actions.
Oh, absolutely. No, that's why I say I see connections there. But that's just, kind of that's where I was coming from there. Again, perspective. But
right.
Honestly and truly, I was not disappointed at all.
Well, thank you.
Very enjoyable, and thank you so much. A lot of good comments from everyone too. So enjoy your week.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mary.
Thanks,
Good to
Alan.
see you. Blessed week.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Hey, Vern.
Thank you all so much. There were so many great comments and discussion, and the discussion was really great, and it's wonderful to see all of you. I apologize for some of the technical difficulties in the beginning, but so we're coming on the hour now. So if nobody has any other questions or comments, Mary, did you have any final thoughts you want to leave everyone with? No closing thoughts.
No, just I think that everyone who joins what Geneva's doing here is looking to make the world better, and I applaud all of that, and I thank all of you for that. That's it.
Thank you. A question for Geneva.
Sure.
You do a lot of these, don't you?
Yes.
Okay, the name is starting to be familiar, and so
I would say we almost do one at least once a week at this
Yes.
point.
Yep, you do.
So if you're on, I don't know if you're on our mailing list, but I'd be happy to add you.
Oh, yeah, I'm on it. That's why I get
Okay.
them all. But
Great.
thank you. And the technical difficulty is something that happened to you. You didn't choose it. We're all very forgiving. So
Yeah, I actually had to restart my computer. I was able to go live on Facebook for the discussion, so that's good. But I did record all of it, and I will send it out to our email list, and I will add it to our YouTube channel. So if anyone missed any part of the talk, I will send that out later. And so I thank you for joining us. Thank you all for your time. Thank you for Mary so much for sharing your wisdom. And I hope that you all have a wonderful day. And I hope you'll join us again soon.
Thank you.
Great. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.